On a breezy fall afternoon in Manhattan, a man in jeans, sneakers, and a plain black jacket stood quietly at the edge of Fifth Avenue, blending into the crowd like just another face in the city. But John Bennett was far from ordinary. Beneath that casual outfit was the mind of a multimillionaire, the founder of one of the most successful luxury retail chains on the East Coast. He wasn't there for press or praise. He was there to uncover the truth about his own store. Inside, Bennett's flagship location glistened with marble floors, designer lighting, and curated displays of watches and fine jewelry. It was elegance wrapped in gold, but the true test of a brand wasn't the merchandise, it was the people behind the counter. So John walked in, not as the owner, but as a quiet shopper. What happened next would redefine the future of his entire company. Within minutes, he was dismissed by Richard Coleman, the store's manager, a man too quick to judge by the cover. When John asked about a $122,000 watch, Richard's reply was laced with smug condescension. "It might not be in your budget," he had said, barely masking his bias. When John expressed interest in a designer coat, the tone was the same, cold, clipped, and judgmental. Richard didn't recognize him, didn't see a CEO, just a black man in casual clothes. And that was all he needed to decide this customer wasn't worthy of his time. But the next day, that customer walked into the company's headquarters as the boss. When Richard entered the executive boardroom, expecting a routine meeting, he nearly tripped over his own arrogance as he locked eyes with John Bennett, now seated at the head of the table. The realization hit him like a punch. John didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. With calm authority, he laid out every disrespectful word Richard had said, every judgment made, and every opportunity squandered. "You don't get to decide who belongs here," he said. "Respect is not optional in my company." Richard's franchise agreement was terminated on the spot. In his place, John promoted Sarah Moore, the assistant manager who had stayed professional through the storm. Under her leadership, the store transformed. New staff training, clear expectations, a renewed culture of inclusion and respect. John didn't just make a change, he set a new standard. What began as a quiet visit turned into a powerful reckoning. And from that moment on, anyone who walked through those golden doors, regardless of race, income, or appearance, would be met with dignity. Because John Bennett wasn't building a brand, he was building a legacy. It was just another Monday morning at the flagship store of Bennett Luxe on Fifth Avenue. At least, that's what the staff thought. The doors opened promptly, the floors gleamed, and the scent of imported cologne floated through the air. But what none of them knew was that John Bennett, the founder and owner of the entire brand, had returned. Not in a tailored suit, but dressed like any other passerby. In sneakers, a plain jacket, and a baseball cap, he moved like a shadow through his own store, testing not the quality of the merchandise, but the character of his people. What he discovered left a bitter taste. Richard Coleman, the franchise manager of the location, had not only failed to recognize him, but treated him with blatant condescension. Bennett was spoken to as if he were a nuisance, questioned, doubted, and subtly pushed out the door. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable elsewhere," Richard had said, the words dipped in the smug confidence of a man too secure in his assumptions. But John Bennett didn't build a multi-million-dollar brand by staying silent. The very next morning, Richard was summoned to the corporate headquarters for what he assumed would be a strategic review. He arrived dressed sharp, rehearsed, and oblivious. The moment he stepped into the boardroom and saw John seated at the head of the table, his confidence cracked. Recognition spread across his face like spilled ink. Too fast, too late. "Take a seat," John said, his voice calm but weighted. What followed wasn't a confrontation. It was a reckoning. Bennett didn't need to shout. He simply laid out the facts, what he had seen, how he had been treated, and what that said about Richard's leadership. It wasn't just about disrespecting a hidden CEO. It was about the everyday customers who were likely judged the same way, denied the experience they deserved, not because of their wallet, but because of their skin, clothes, or perceived status. Richard begged, he backpedaled, he promised to change. But John didn't waver. "This brand," he said, "was built to make luxury feel accessible, not exclusive. If you can't see the value in people, you don't belong at the top." Richard's contract was terminated that day. In his place, John promoted Sarah Moore, an assistant manager who had quietly shown integrity even under pressure. Her leadership marked a turning point. Staff training was overhauled, culture was redefined, and the store that once turned away the man who built it was now a model of what true luxury should be, not just polished surfaces and price tags, but dignity, inclusion, and respect. John's undercover visit started with silence, but ended with a statement that echoed throughout the company. In Bennett Lux, every customer matters, not because of what they wear, but because of who they are. On a crisp fall afternoon, John Bennett walked through the front doors of his luxury flagship store for the third time in a week. This time, not undercover. The air inside was different now. Where tension had once lingered between marble floors and crystal display cases, a new kind of energy buzzed quietly. Staff greeted customers with genuine smiles. Conversations flowed more easily. Even the soft jazz playing overhead felt warmer. The toxic air Richard Coleman had left behind was finally beginning to clear. Behind this transformation was Sarah Moore, the newly appointed interim manager. She had been quiet once, working diligently under the radar while Richard took credit for success he barely earned. But when John handed her the reins, something shifted. Confidence replaced hesitation. Leadership bloomed in the space that had once been smothered. And the team? They followed her lead. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. That day, John had come to see how far things had progressed, and what he witnessed filled him with quiet pride. James, the young sales associate who once questioned everything during that tense team meeting, now moved with purpose and ease, helping an elderly customer choose a gift for her granddaughter. Claire, the cashier who once asked how to deal with difficult customers, now handled a rude remark with such poise, even the customer walked away smiling. These weren't just signs of improvement, they were proof of change. As John made his way to the back of the store, he found Sarah walking a new hire through the product layout. She looked up, her eyes brightening. "Mr. Bennett," she greeted. "Wasn't expecting you today. Thought I'd drop in," he said, smiling. "And it looks like I picked the perfect time." Sarah nodded. "We're finding our rhythm." John glanced around, watching as the new team interacted with ease. "You've done more than that," he replied. "You've changed the tune completely." They stepped into her office for a quick debrief. Sarah shared updates about the new inclusivity training, about the anonymous feedback system they'd implemented, about a customer who returned simply because the place just felt better. John listened, impressed, but it was her final note that truly struck him. "One of the employees told me yesterday," she said, "that this is the first time they felt seen at work, not just as a worker, as a person." That sentence stayed with him long after he left the store, because this wasn't just a business turnaround. It was a human one. John Bennett had once walked into this store and been treated like an outsider in the empire he built. But now, walking out through those same doors, he knew something had shifted, for good. It was no longer just about luxury. It was about leadership, inclusion, and legacy. And it was clear, the store wasn't just back on track, it was leading the way. Within just 2 weeks of Richard's dismissal, the atmosphere inside that luxury store had completely transformed. There was no need to redecorate or hang flashy slogans. The real change lay in how people treated one another. Under Sarah Moore's leadership, the judgmental stares were gone, the condescending tones had vanished. Employees now greeted customers with sincerity, not suspicion. Whether someone walked in wearing a tailored suit or a hoodie, they were offered water, engaged in conversation, and most importantly, they were heard. John Bennett stood quietly in a corner of the store, the same spot where Richard had once looked down on him. Now, as he watched a teenage girl trying on designer sunglasses with 2 smiling staff members, or a blue-collar worker being patiently shown a $10,000 watch, he knew this was the direction he was meant to go. This wasn't just a store being revived. It was a value system being reborn. It was no longer a place that sold exclusivity to a select few. It had become a space where anyone who walked in felt worthy, felt respected. At a staff meeting back at headquarters, Sarah reported with a spark in her eyes, "We're starting to see new customers. People from neighborhoods that never stepped foot in before. They're coming in now because they heard something's changed." Her words landed on John's ears like soft music. He knew then. This wasn't just a win for the business. This was a victory for trust, for kindness being placed where it belonged. He hadn't just replaced a manager, he had restored the soul of a brand. And then he smiled. No walls needed tearing down, no massive promotions required. Sometimes all it takes to transform a space is changing the way people look at each other, from suspicion to respect. The conference room at the headquarters wasn't grand, but on that Tuesday morning, it felt like the heart of something much bigger. Around the oval table sat the entire staff from the Fifth Avenue store, sales associates, customer care reps, back office personnel, all wearing the same expression, uncertainty. Whispers had been flying for days. Richard Coleman was gone, and no one quite knew what came next. But they were about to find out. John Bennett stepped into the room, not just as a CEO, but as a man who had seen what silence could allow. He didn't clear his throat or tap on the table for attention. He simply stood, hands resting on the back of a chair, and began speaking. Not from a script, but from conviction. "I know the past week has shaken things up," he said, scanning the room, his voice calm but firm. "Richard is no longer part of this company, and I'm here to tell you why. Not because of numbers, but because of values." He paused, letting that sink in. This brand was built on respect, on inclusion, on the belief that luxury is not a costume, it's a feeling. It's how someone is made to feel when they walk through those doors, seen, heard, valued. And that hasn't been happening. There was a quiet shift in the room. Some leaned forward, others dropped their gaze, but all were listening. Then John gestured to the woman beside him, Sarah Moore. Sarah has been with this company for years. She's been professional, resilient, and observant. I saw it the day Richard dismissed me as just another guy in sneakers. Sarah didn't follow his lead. She watched, she thought, and she treated me with quiet dignity. He turned to her. "Sarah is your new interim manager." There was a pause, then applause. Not loud, but real. Sarah looked stunned, then grateful, then ready. "I'm not here to change everything overnight," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "But I am here to listen, to lead with integrity, and to make sure that no customer and no staff member feels unseen." John nodded. "Starting next week, we'll begin a series of training sessions focused on inclusivity, service excellence, and unconscious bias. You won't be lectured, you'll be empowered. Because this isn't about blame, it's about growth." One of the younger associates, James, raised his hand. "And what happens if we see the kind of behavior that got us here in the first place?" John smiled. "Then you speak up, you'll be heard, and I'll back you." As the meeting wrapped up, the atmosphere had changed. The fear was still there, yes, but now it had a rival, hope. And in the hands of people like Sarah, John knew that hope would have room to grow. Because this wasn't just a new chapter, it was the start of a better story. It had only been 10 days, but when John Bennett stepped through the glass doors of his Fifth Avenue store, it felt like walking into an entirely new world. Gone was the chill in the air, the weight of judgment, the silence that used to settle when someone walked in wearing sneakers instead of designer shoes. In its place was something warmer, lighter, almost electric. The familiar chime echoed softly as he entered, and James, the young associate who once hesitated to speak in meetings, greeted him with a genuine smile. "Good morning, Mr. Bennett," he said. "We weren't expecting you, but we're glad you're here." John nodded, taking in the scene before him. The store, with its polished marble floors and elegant displays, hadn't changed physically, but the energy, that was unmistakable. Customers browsed comfortably, laughing with staff, trying on luxury items without the usual tension. A teenage girl in jeans was being shown a high-end handbag with the same care and attention as a businessman in a three-piece suit examining a Rolex. In the past, this would have raised Richard Coleman's eyebrow, or worse, but now it was standard. He made his way toward the back, where Sarah Moore stood helping an older couple compare sunglasses. When she spotted him, she excused herself and walked over, her expression proud but calm. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "everything's going better than I hoped." "I can see that," he replied, his voice full of something close to wonder. Sarah led him through the store, pointing out subtle changes, a more collaborative approach to team shifts, customer feedback cards being collected in real time, and a new employee initiative where staff could anonymously highlight acts of kindness within the team. But John didn't need data to know the difference. He could feel it in the way a customer smiled as they were offered a drink. He saw it in how an associate knelt beside an elderly woman to help her try on a pair of shoes. No rush, no pressure, just respect. This, John said, pausing in the center of the store, this is what I always imagined the brand could be. Sarah smiled. It's what it was always meant to be. We just needed the right permission to live it out. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the room. And you gave it to them. As he stood there, in the very space where he'd once been dismissed for wearing a hoodie, John realized something profound. Culture isn't written on mission statements. It's lived, one small moment at a time. And now, thanks to the right leadership and a shared belief in dignity, respect, and inclusion, the heart of his brand was finally beating loud enough for everyone to hear. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a transformation.